Hi, this is Stuart Corrigan from Vanguard Scotland, and in this short video I'm going to demonstrate how to get a massive performance improvement within your organisation. We've been taught that as managers we have to do certain things to optimise our businesses. You may recognise things like using targets, doing one-to-ones, performance management by managing the people, using incentives and competitions. And in fact, what I'd like to show you today is that all these things are making the performance of your organisation worse. You see, these things come from the early 1900s, an era of mass production where Henry Ford thought that this was the right thing to do to manage his organisation. However, in 2010, when there's much greater variety and the customer has a much greater say in the output of the organisation, this outdated management style will actually make performance of the organisation worse, not better. In fact, what I'd like to show is that 95% of performance is down to how the organisational system performs, not down to how the individual person performs. Let me show you a quick example. Here we have a washing machine engineer. Now, the first thing you have to ask when trying to improve any system is the question, what's the purpose of the system from the customer's perspective? Well, the purpose of this system quite clearly is to repair a washing machine. So the question then is, how much control does a washing machine engineer have over doing a good job? Now, most people would say very, very high, maybe 70 to 80%. But in actual fact, what you'll see is his control is very small because the performance is down to the system. Let's look at what happens when a call comes in. A customer phones the contact centre, and when you study the nature of demand, you'll see that there are three types of calls. The first type of call we would classify as value demand. It's a kind of demand that you want. Someone phoning in to say, can I have my washing machine repaired? However, when you study more demand, you see that there are another two types. Both failure demand. Failure demand is a failure of the system to do the right thing for the customer. For example, someone calls in to say the washing machine engineer hasn't arrived yet. And another customer calls in to say that the washing machine's been repaired, but it's not been done correctly. When you study demand, you see that around 70% of the calls look like this. As a result, call volume is increasing and also costs are increasing. You then want to know what happens to the call when it lands at the contact centre. Well, the purpose of the contact centre is to do a good diagnosis. Unfortunately, the call centre agents are measured on the number of calls they take, the time that they're on the call, and wrap-up time, which is the amount of time that they spend when they're not handling calls. As a result, this dramatically impacts their ability to do a good diagnosis because they're not interested in how well the diagnosis is done. What they're actually interested in is hitting their call targets. As a result, when you ask the question, how good is the diagnosis, you find it's not very good at all. In fact, around 40% of the time, the diagnosis is incorrect. As a result, when the washing machine repairman goes out to see the customer, he has to have the customer call back in, which means higher call volume, tighter targets, and the whole thing becomes a cycle of poor performance. The next step in the process is that the washing machine repair engineer goes to collect the parts. What do you think the parts managers will be measured on? Well, they're measured on having the least amount of parts available. In other words, managers believe that if we use incentives, that will improve performance. Actually, again, it's made performance worse. It's made performance worse because managers are now focused on having the least amount of parts. not having the right parts for the engineer. As a result, when he turns up, we find that 30% of the time the parts he needs are not available. What does he have to do? He has to call the customer, who calls back in, and again call volume increases. And rather than pushing costs down, what's actually happening is it's pushing costs up. This is what traditional management does to a system. The final thing that happens is that the call is scheduled. The people scheduling the calls are measured on the number of calls that they manage to fit in for the washing machine engineer. They try to fit in around 14 to 15 per day. But when you spend time with the engineer, what you see is that he spends the first hour of his day phoning the customers to cancel the first 3 or 4. As such, those customers have to call back in, poor service, higher costs, and a very, very expensive and badly run system. The really sad thing about this system is what would happen at the end of the month is the washing machine repairman would be called in to see his manager, and his manager would say things like, "You haven't had a very good week this week. What do we need to do to improve your performance?" When in actual fact, the performance of the washing machine engineer is determined by the performance of the system. As you've just seen, he has very little control over how good a job he does. In fact, in the 1940s, Deming, the quality guru, said 95% of performance is down to the system, not the people. Therefore, there's no point in doing things like one-to-ones, using incentives, using targets, using competitions to improve performance, because performance is down to the system. If you'd like more information on how to optimize your organization, go to our website at systemsthinkingmethod.com, and you'll find ideas and insights and case studies there that can help you take your organization to the next level. Thank you very much.